Okay.
And we are recording. Hey, everybody, it's Katie and Beth.
Hi.
Hi. What are we talking about today?
We are talking about the path to freedom that's at the end of our 4 Agreements book. It's the very last section of the book before we move on to the next one.
And it kind of just sums up everything that we've been learning over the course of the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it does. There are a couple of things that I actually earmarked in my book because I wanted to remember them. And it talks about developing awareness of our own self-limitations, which I thought was really interesting because, if you think about the 4 agreements and what we've learned, do your best and be impeccable with your word and those, all of those things that we talked about in the last couple of videos. How often do we not follow those because we limit ourselves and our beliefs to what we're used to? And something that really stood out to me was the very last page of this little section says, suffering makes you feel safe because you know it so well. And I just was like, oh my gosh, how true is that? We think in life that what we're going through is the only, there is nothing else that we could do to change our situation or make it better or make it different. And then we let ourselves suffer instead of going out and doing something that could make a difference in our life, or just even recognizing that, no, we're not stuck in this situation. We're choosing this situation.
That's the biggest thing for me, or the biggest thing that I picked up when I first read this book, is the awareness of it. No, I don't have to. Like, for instance, the book gives a really good example about this whole scenario in terms of marriage. Remember that part. So before, when we get married, we say, oh, now I'm not free anymore. Or we have that thought that we're not free anymore. Well, why? Yeah. Well, who is hindering that freedom? It's certainly not your spouse. And whatever do you mean by that anyway?
Right.
And then it goes on to give the example of, so you leave your marriage and you end up getting divorced or whatever, but then you're still not free. Well, who is keeping you in that quote unquote mental prison? And
yeah.
you can play the victim and you can say, oh, well, my ex-husband, oh, well, the courts, oh, well, blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, if you dial it all back, you're the one keeping yourself in mental prison, because you can just accept your ex-husband is the way he is. You can just accept the court decided what the court decided and move on from that, right? But instead or hopefully not always, but we tend to. Why do we tend to keep ourselves trapped? Because of what you just said. It's comfortable.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting that that we're talking about freedom, because I was just at a Salad Master convention the last 4 days, and one of the things that they touched on really hard was that you don't have to live in the past. And oftentimes people will live in the present past, which means everything that's happened in their past is dictating their present. And then there's people who are present future people, who they're living in the present, but they're looking towards the future and working towards the future that they want, regardless of what has happened in the past. And I think that is the key to freedom. Looking at your situation now and saying, okay, what can I do to change this to be what I want, to create that freedom that I need, or that future that I want for me and my family.
And then you touched on something interesting. So neither one of those descriptions described a person that's actually just living in the moment.
Right.
And there was a very interesting sort of thing that was described in this particular chapter in the book, I felt, and this relates to a lot of us with little kids. Look at your 2, 3, and 4-year-old. they're completely free. They probably always have a smile on their face. So why is that? Like, how do we get to this point as adults when that's where we began? We always did what we wanted. I mean, within reason. I mean, we try to get them to listen to us as parents, but, they're constantly doing what they want. They're living in the moment. They're not thinking about what happened yesterday. They're not thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow.
Right.
Where do we lose that?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, like, we as parents teach our kids, like, the consequences of their actions, whether those are good or bad. Like, well, when you do this, this is what happens. And, that is the case for so many years. And eventually that probably just instills this idea that, okay, well, if I do this, then that's going to be what happens. Or if I don't do this, then this is going to be the result. And so then you start making choices based on the results you want instead of making choices about what you want right now.
Mm-hmm. It's a really good point. And I know we've talked about this a lot. And I try to be as consciously aware as possible because I am growing a small human. But our biggest teachers in life are our parents. And I still to this day mimic some of the things my parents have taught me. But think about our children, they're mimicking us all day long. And so if we're self-conscious about our appearance, let's just say, eventually that 2, 3, 4-year-old, in that repetition of mimicking us, is probably going to grow up with that. And that's going to hinder, maybe not, but my guess is it's going to hinder and shield them away from some opportunities because they're too focused and worried about their appearance.
Right. Well, I mean, we do that to ourselves all the time. So, and I mean, our kids do copy everything that we do and we say. They learn by our example, not by what we actually say. And if we're setting an example of constantly being worried about something, then they're going to start being worried about something. But if we set the example of living in the moment and doing the things that will make us happy, and then they're going to start doing the things that make them happy. And they're going to live in the moment and just play and be happy.
I totally agree. So here's what I'm hearing. Number one, awareness. Biggest thing. And I think what could piggyback on that too is forgiveness. So let's be aware of how we keep ourselves in mental prison. That takes a lot of work for people. I mean, it took a lot of work for me to have that awareness. So that's a journey in and of itself. But at that point, let's have some forgiveness of how we were raised, or, what our parents taught us or what we mimicked from our parents, because that's also holding us in that victim mentality too.
Right. I think that was kind of part of what I was getting at about, like, not holding taking the past into your present and your future, because there are things that happen that are out of our control. But when we hang on to those and we don't forgive whatever it is, then that is going to keep us trapped.
Yep. Absolutely will keep us trapped.
Forgiveness is for us. It's not for the people we're forgiving.
Right. Exactly. What's that saying? It hurts you more to, what is that saying? It has something to do with poison. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do. I think it was even in the book.
You're the one that's actually taking the poison when you have grudges against somebody, hold judgment, hold anger, basically be that victim mentality.
Mm-hmm.
It was funny. Over the weekend, I had an opportunity. I did a lot of stuff over the weekend, and I was around a lot of kids in a lot of different opportunities. And I did some observing. I met some kids that I didn't previously know, previously know their moms or anything. And I just did some observing, and, I didn't share my thoughts with anyone. I was just kind of observing for myself. And there was a group of boys, 3 little boys that were playing. And two of them knew each other, and one of them was new to the group. And so the two that knew each other, I guess the new guy, I didn't see this, but I guess the new guy maybe pushed one of them or something like that. And I mean, it wasn't, boys play like that. It wasn't a violent thing. He didn't mean to hurt anybody. I think he was just kind of getting a little rough. And so the other two boys both looked at each other and said, well, he's not being very nice. We don't want to play with him, and walked away. And that left the new boy there by himself, and he became extremely sad. And he looked at me, because I was the only mom standing there at the moment, and he looked at me and he said, they're gone, they're leaving. And I said, oh, yeah, well, I'm here. And then there was another little girl around, and I said, I'm here and she's here, and, let's play something. And he said, well, with a cutest little pouty face, I felt so bad. He said, well, I can't be happy unless they're here. And I was like, whoa, baby, this is like just a couple of year-old kid, I mean,
yeah,
3 or 4 or something like that. I don't know exactly, but enough that he could speak to me and everything. And I was in this weird spot because somebody else's kid, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so, but I so badly wanted to tell him, oh no, baby, you're in charge of your own happiness. And I know that's a little deep. I get kind of deep like that with my 4-year-old, so I don't know, maybe.
Well, it's important to teach our kids that nobody else can make them happy.
Exactly.
And I mean, if you think about all of the relationships in the world that have abuse or people who feel trapped in a marriage or a relationship, a lot of the times it's because they were looking for that validation in someone. They were looking for someone else to make them happy, instead of realizing that happiness comes from within, and it comes from that confidence in yourself. And we've talked a lot about that over the last few weeks, how being confident in yourself and your abilities and your skills and loving yourself is really going to just make life so much better and so much easier.
It's everything. It's honestly,
it is.
Bottom line, everything. So this poor little boy is looking to outside sources to deliver his happiness at this age. I think he's 4.
That's crazy.
I think so too, and no judgment to his parents by any means.
No.
It's just that's how young it begins.
Yeah. Well, and my 4-year-old does similar things where she'll be like, Mom, Alice is making me mad. And, her little sister just won't share a toy with her or something silly. And I'm like, no, sweetie, like, you don't have to get mad about that. You can choose to just go do something else.
Like, you're making you mad.
Yeah.
You're not making you anything. Perhaps you don't like what she's doing, but you're making you mad.
Right. You're choosing to be that way. And so it's a conversation that we've had to start having too, about like, it's okay to have emotions and it's okay to feel a certain way, but you can't blame that on anyone else.
Absolutely. Absolutely true. Well, that about sums up what I got from this chapter.
Yeah, I think this entire book can be summed up in being aware of ourselves and being the best version of ourselves.
Yes, and seeking to understand situations completely before we cast any judgment, or even let's not cast judgment at all on ourselves or others.
Yeah, absolutely.
That might be the safest bet.
I absolutely agree with you. I really enjoyed this book, and I hope we were able to share some little nuggets of wisdom with all of you who are watching us. And I'm really excited for the next book too, because it's
what is the next book?
The next book is The 5 Love Languages.
Woo-hoo, I'm excited.
Yep. And Katie, tell me what you think of this idea. You can take the 5 love languages assessment online. So maybe in our off week, next week, when we don't post a video, we can post that so the moms can take it and know what their love language is before we jump into the nitty gritty.
I love that idea. Let's do that.
All right. So they'll have to keep an eye out for that, because it's going to be fantastic. It's a lot easier to work on ourselves when we know what we're working with.
Precisely. I love it, and you, and this. So thank you so much for being here with me. Thank you, moms, for being here with us, and we'll see you next week. Well, We'll see you in 2 weeks with our live, but we'll have a post next week with what Beth just said.
Yeah, that'll be great. Yay!
All right. Bye.